Hello Year 9 and welcome to the exciting exercise 8E, factorising by grouping in pairs. So hopefully you're starting to get a hang of the idea or get a feel for the idea that there are lots of different factorising questions that we're going to come across. Now this exercise talks about how sometimes when we have a common factor that we can take out, it could be a binomial common factor. What that actually means is that we might be actually taking out a common bracket from each term. On other occasions, there could be up to 4 terms with no common factor at all, but we're going to then group in pairs. So you'll actually see how that works when we start our examples. So let's get into it. Here's our first example. Now, it says factorise by taking out a binomial common factor. Well, let's see what's common. What's common here? Now, if you have a look at this bracket, there's a bracket that has m plus 2n. There's another bracket that has m plus 2n. There are actually 2 terms in this question. Here is our first term. Here is our second term. And they're separated by this plus sign, which makes the second term positive. Now, yes, there's a plus sign inside the brackets, but when they're inside brackets, we're not actually counting them because they've been factorised already. So we're looking for a plus sign that's not inside brackets, and there it is, right there. So we've got 2 messy terms. Let's actually have a look. Each term contains a common bracket. So let's try taking out the common bracket. Now the common bracket gets written down. Then what we do is we put our leftovers in our second bracket. And what are the leftovers that we didn't put out the front in our common bracket because it was m plus 2n happening twice? There's a 3 and a plus 4e. So 3 plus 4e goes in my leftover bracket and we are finished. Let's try this again with our second example. Now what we're looking for, is there a common bracket? Well, I've got an 8 take 4b in brackets here, an a take 4b, sorry, in this second bracket here. So 2a take 4b in brackets. You need to remember that this bracket really has a 1 in front of it. Yes, there are 2 terms and they're separated by this minus sign here. So the common bracket is a take 4b. I've just rewritten the question with the 1 out the front here so we can see it. This one here. Common brackets a take 4b, so I write that down in a set of brackets. What goes in the remaining part, this bit here? 3a minus 1. And there's your answer. Let's see if we can get a hang of this for another one. Now, what we're looking for first of all is we're being asked to factorise by grouping in pairs. Now realistically, there is no common factor in all 4 terms. There are 4 terms here, all separated by a plus sign. The only common factor is 1, and 1's not a very helpful common factor here, so let's group it in pairs. And what I mean by that, and I'll rewrite it, we're going to look at the first pair, the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. So what I'll do is I'll write the first 2 in red, these 2 in red, and I'll write the last 2 in green, just so they stand out. Now focus on the red part. If I was looking at the red part and that was a question by itself, what's common? Well, they both have a letter M. So you'd write down M bracket n plus 3, the bits that weren't left with the M. Now let's focus on the green part. The green part has a common factor as well. 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 9, so I'll write plus 3 because it's a positive 3. And what's left over? N. And 3 goes into 9 3 times. I can do a quick check. What's m times n? Mn. What's m times 3? 3m. What's 3 times n? 3n. What's 3 times 3? 9. So that all checks out. Now I've got it down to, oops, let me get rid of that. Now I've got it down to common brackets of n plus 3. They're separated by a plus sign, so I can take out that common bracket of n plus 3. What goes in the leftovers? M plus 3. And there's my final answer. That's called grouping in pairs. Here's another one. Let's see if we can group it in pairs. So we're looking at the first two terms and the last two terms and taking out common factors. So what I'll do is I'll write them in red and green again, just so that they stand out. That's the original question, just written in red and green. If I look at the red parts, what's common? Well, the letter Q is common, so I can take out Q as a common factor. What am I left with? 10p minus 1, because it's a 1q. So I can actually take out Q and be left with 10p minus 1. Now if I look at the green parts, what's common? Well, 2 goes into 20 and 2 goes into 2. So 2 is common, but if I take out a common factor of 2, it's not actually what I want, because I'll end up with a plus 1 here and I want a minus. So I'm going to take out a common factor of minus 2. And let's see what happens. If I take out a common factor of minus 2 goes into 20 10 times. Minus 2 times 10 gives minus 20, and there's my p. Minus 2 goes into plus 2 minus 1 times. That's a bit tricky. Think about this part. Well, let's check it. Q times 10p, 10pq. Q times minus 1, minus 1q. Minus 2 times 10p, minus 2 times 10, minus 20p. And this is the bit that I wanted to make sure we highlight. A negative 2 times a negative 1 gives a positive 2. That means that that's all worked nicely. So now if I have a look at the question, 10p take 1 is in that bracket, 10p take 1 is in that bracket, common bracket. Write down the common bracket. And in my second bracket, what are the leftover bits? Q take 2. And if I expanded those brackets out, I would end up with that statement there, the question. That's factorized by grouping in pairs. Now, let's have a look at part C. And this is where sometimes you come across some interesting and difficult questions when you're factorizing by grouping in pairs. If I look at my first two terms and my second two terms, the first two terms have nothing in common. 2 doesn't go into 9, there's no x or a in the second term. I've got some problems. So when I look at it, there are no common factors other than 1, and that doesn't count. So what I'm going to do is rewrite the question, except in a different order. So I'm going to write the 2xa first. I might write the x next because they've both got x's. And then I'll write the minus 9 and the minus 18a. So it's the same question, just written with the terms in a different order. Now when I look at the terms, consider the first two terms, I'll write them in red. The last two terms, I'll write those in green. If I look at the red parts, what do they have in common? The letter x. So I can take out x as a common factor. And if I take out x as a common factor, what am I left with? Well, there's the 2 and the a from that term. And if I take out x, there'll be still a 1 left there, so I'll get 2a plus 1. Now let's look at the bits in green. I've got a minus, a 9 and an 18. I want to take out minus 9 as a common factor because 9 goes into 9 and 9 goes into 18. And they both are minuses, so if I take out minus 9 as a common factor, what am I left with? Well, minus 9 goes into itself once, and minus 9 goes into minus 18. Well, minuses cancel each other. 9 into 18 twice, so it's plus 2a. You can do a quick check. X times 2a, 2xa or 2ax. X times 1, 1x. Minus 9 times 1, minus 9. Minus 9 times positive 2a is minus 18a. So that all balances out nicely. Now I look at the question, common bracket. This one's written in the reverse order, but 2a plus 1 is the same as 1 plus 2a, so they are the same bracket. So I can write down my common bracket. Just writing it in order there, you don't have to write that step. 2a plus 1 is the common bracket. What goes in the leftover bracket? X minus 9. And we've now factorized one of the harder questions by grouping in pairs. Time for you to try some of these questions, see how you go, and again, highlight anything you're struggling with so that we can go through it when I get back. Enjoy!